Coming up, Teaching Indigenous Health. We'll find out about the only PhD program in the world. Dr. Don Warne will tell us more. And climate change is real and personal for many Indigenous families. Our senior editor, Dianna Hunt, joins us to share some stories. I'm Patty Thalonghva. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian Country Today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalonghva. A judge in South Dakota will determine whether charges will be dismissed against Nick Tilson, the CEO of Indian Collective. The Pennington County State's Attorney continues to pursue multiple charges after Tilson participated in a diversion intake program. His legal team argues emails between the state's attorney and law enforcement amount to misconduct by prosecutors. His charges stem from a July 3, 2020 protest near Mount Rushmore, where former President Donald Trump spoke at a fireworks celebration. Tilson faces 17 years in prison if he's convicted. Ojibwe tribes are fighting a planned wolf hunt in Wisconsin. The case is in federal court with 6 nations arguing the proposed hunt is not grounded in sound biological principles. Tribal leaders also say the hunt violates the tribe's treaty rights. The court ruled the Department of Natural Resources must update its management plan, including how it sets harvest quotas. And though litigation continues, last week the Natural Resources Department announced licenses will not be issued to state hunters and trappers for this fall's wolf hunt. In St. Joseph, Minnesota, nuns at a monastery are apologizing for boarding school trauma. According to NPR News, Sister Pat Kennedy says it's only the beginning from St. Benedict's Monastery, adding that words, in a sense, are cheap. The challenge is to show action. In that effort, the monastery opened its archives to researchers from the White Earth Ojibwe Nation who are looking for information about former students. An oral history project to collect boarding school stories was put on hold due to the pandemic. A Native nonprofit is awarding 13 tribal nations $30,000 to combat COVID-19. Illuminative is launching its second phase of the campaign called For the Love of Our People. The idea is to educate Natives who are hesitant about getting the vaccine. The funds will support key initiatives and events and allow the organization to promote vaccinations within the communities. As of mid-October, all 12 of the Indian health service providers have experienced a growing surge in COVID-19 cases. According to the CDC, Native people face the highest rates of infection, hospitalization, and death due to COVID-19. The Interior Department is announcing the next steps for its new Indian Youth Service Corps program. The department will be meeting with tribes, Alaska Native corporations, and the Native Hawaiian community to draft program guidelines. This is the latest in a series of consulting sessions highlighting the Interior's commitment to centering Indigenous voices. The initiative will provide education, employment, and training to Native youth through conservation projects on tribal and public lands. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland says the program has the potential to transform the lives of Indigenous youth. The first meeting will be with tribes east of the Mississippi River, and it's set for November 30th. Well, this past weekend, one Indigenous MMA fighter in Phoenix, Arizona, entered the cage for the last time. ICT correspondent Karina Dominguez reports.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
It was a rowdy Saturday night for Indigenous MMA fighters who entered the cage at Celebrity Theater in Phoenix, with one winning his retirement fight. Shannon Rich stepped into the cage for his last time and won his pro headliner matchup against Samson Guerrero via submission in the first round with a rear naked choke. As soon as he kind of turned, what were you thinking?
I was like, I got him. I'm 51 years old, making my last fight in front of my hometown and for a native promotion. This is a dream come true.
Rich had his first fight in 1991 when it was still called No Holds Barred. He was the first Native American world champion MMA fighter.
I fought in New Mexico, and it was for a native promotion, and they had the first Native American championships for mixed martial arts. And I won, and I went through the tournament and won 3 fights in a row in one night, and I got the belt.
Now that he's tapping out after 237 professional fights, the most out of any MMA fighter, he'll be exploring acting full-time. He has a movie coming out with Mickey Rourke and Michael J. White in January called The Commando, and another coming out with Bruce Willis. On Saturday, Darren Martinez from Gila River won his amateur title 265-pound matchup against George Soapy, who's Samoa from Oahu.
I've talked about this, coming and fighting, under a big card and just pursuing it.
In Phoenix, Karina Dominguez, reporting for ICT.
And those are the headlines for Indian Country today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Coming up, we'll visit with Dr. Dawn Warne, who oversees the only PhD program in Indigenous health, and find out what other unique programs the University of North Dakota offers. The medical needs of American Indians and Alaska Natives is high for a number of reasons, and there's a greater need to train more Indigenous people in the field of medicine. One program that's making strides is based at the University of North Dakota. It's led by Dr. Dawn Warne and is being recognized as being highly innovative. Dr. Warne joins us today to tell us more. Welcome, Dr. Warne.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, congratulations, first of all, on your most recent award. The American Public Health Association honored you with the 2021 Helen Rodriguez Trias Award for Social Justice. And they say it's presented to someone who has distinguished themselves professionally by working towards social justice for disadvantaged populations. And that certainly fits, the work that you've done in your career and throughout your life. So let's talk about some of those programs that earned you this prestigious award.
Yeah, very good. And first of all, Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trias was a wonderful social justice advocate, and not just for her own population, but really for all populations. So I was deeply honored to have an award in her name from the American Public Health Association. In terms of my own work, I'm Oglala Lakota, originally from Kyle, South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, but spent much of my career in Arizona, where I worked as a primary care doctor and also with several tribes and the Intertribal Council of Arizona. Over the last decade, I've been back in North Dakota and focused on academic programs. So I'm currently the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at UND, also director of our brand new PhD in Indigenous Health, as well as the Indians into Medicine program.
Some really great innovative thinking going on there, but maybe perhaps let's start with InMed, because that has been around for a number of years, and it has trained a number of Native people to go into medical fields.
Exactly, yeah. Indians into Medicine, or InMed, has been around since 1973, so we're getting close to our 50-year anniversary. And we're very pleased that we've had over 260 American Indian and Alaska Native medical school graduates out of InMed programming. So really feel like we're doing our part trying to increase the numbers of American Indian physicians. And if you look at the most recent census data, there's about 9.7 million American Indian and Alaska Native people. And unfortunately, we're only about 0.4% of physicians, even though we're over 2% of the US population. So very underserved in terms of the medical community. And we know that people tend to work with communities where they are from. So we need more of us to go into medicine and related health fields.
Because there's that ability to really relate. And, when you look at American Indians, Alaska Natives, and all of the trauma that's in our lives, historical trauma, how do you begin to treat one illness without knowing this huge background?
And I think that's why it's so important to have more of our own people going into health sciences, whether it's clinical care or research or any other field, quite honestly. I think that lived experience is so valuable in the healthcare setting, but also in the educational setting, in the business setting, and recognizing that that shared history and the impact of colonization on indigenous peoples that has common outcomes across populations. So we see similar health disparities and similar social challenges when we're looking at indigenous people in the US, Canada, Australia, the Pacific Islands, pretty much anywhere. So the impact of colonization and subsequent historical trauma has an intergenerational impact. So one of the projects that we recently got funded through the National Institutes of Health to establish the Indigenous Trauma and Resilience Research Center. So we're looking at the negative impact of trauma, but I think even more importantly, looking at the strengths-based and positive impact of resilience and cultural connectedness. So it's not just about documenting the disparity. We need to develop new programs that are going to improve outcomes. And I really believe that's rooted in our cultural connectedness.
And that data collection is so vital because and who collects that data and how do they interpret that? That's a huge part of the puzzle here. So often outside sources come in to study us, collect data, but what happens to that data? So in your case, this data will be analyzed by actual indigenous people.
Exactly. And so we'll be doing a lot of original data collection. So we'll have databases, but we also have data sharing agreements with tribal communities. And fortunately, the National Institutes of Health has recognized that working with tribal nations is different than working with other communities, and that with tribal sovereignty, tribes can still own their data, even if it's publicly funded research. So we're very cognizant of that and want to be respectful of tribal sovereignty. So we have some good data sharing agreements with our partners on that front.
That's really wonderful to hear because, again, data is so important, and who owns that data. A couple of years ago, a new program was created that had a unique perspective, the PhD program. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're very proud of our PhD in Indigenous Health. So we've had a Master of Public Health, the MPH degree, with an Indigenous Health specialization. And one of the things that we recognize is that in the research community, first of all, there's not enough American Indians in health research. And we don't seem to be asking the right questions, generally speaking, because we don't have enough people with lived experience in tribal communities conducting the research. So in my experience, when we have people who really come from the community and really understand some of the challenges that we face, we can conduct better research, we can develop better hypotheses, and we can do a better job at identifying solutions. So that's really the purpose of the PhD. So it's the first of its kind in the world. It's a PhD in Indigenous Health. And I'm so pleased we've hired 8 Indigenous health scholars to join us on our team. And among the 8 of us, we have nearly 200 years of experience in Indigenous health. So the team has been wonderful. And we also have some non-Indigenous faculty members that are tremendous allies and champions for the cause. So I think building this wonderful group of faculty at University of North Dakota has allowed us to recruit more students, and then having more students allows us to recruit more faculty. So it really is synergistic. But just very pleased, in our first cohort, we were hoping we might get 12 students in the first group. We wound up having over 50 applicants, and we matriculated 19 in the first cohort of PhD students. In the second cohort, we had over 100 applicants. And just because of faculty capacity, we wound up admitting 15. So we have 34 Indigenous Health PhD students in the first 2 cohorts. And we've now had over 300 inquiries into the next cohort. So we know it's really needed. And we have students from all over the US and Canada who are in our program now.
That's really amazing, and to see how many people are eager to go into this degree program, a PhD in Indigenous Health. When you're looking at training doctors, are you working to get them into the IHS clinics, or are you looking to get them into urban areas? What is the focus there? How do you mentor and guide students?
Yeah, the answer is all of the above. We definitely need more physicians in IHS, tribal, and urban Indian health centers. But in truth, we also need more specialists. We don't have any American Indian orthopedic surgeons or rheumatologists, some of the things that we really need for our people. And generally speaking, because of the lack of primary care doctors, most of us are encouraged to go into primary care like family medicine or internal medicine or pediatrics. And that's wonderful. We definitely need those providers on the front line. But what I observe is that when our patients get referred to specialists, they never see an American Indian provider, and that's not right. We need to fix that as well. So the way we work with students is we encourage them to pursue their goals and their priorities and what is of value to them, because we need American Indian and Alaska Native providers across the entire gamut of healthcare, research, and other clinical disciplines.
Wow, it's just amazing when you think about education and training our people to become medical providers, and then you throw in that extra of being a specialist. And again, all of those specialist needs are based on historical trauma that happened to us. And if you don't have that bigger understanding, how do you treat somebody who needs something related to diabetes? So very interesting. We have just a short amount of time left, but what other program do you want to emphasize?
Well, a couple of things. We do have a new Department of Indigenous Health at the medical school, which is very innovative. There's one other medical school in Hawaii that has a Department of Native Hawaiian Health, but ours is the first Department of Indigenous Health at a medical school that really does have an international focus. So we're collaborating with the UN in terms of their work group on Indigenous issues, and we're collaborating with universities across the globe that have Indigenous populations and an interest in health. So very pleased with our new Department of Indigenous Health, which houses the research programs, InMed, and the PhD. And we're just getting started with a new MD PhD program that will combine InMed medical students with the PhD in Indigenous health. And the reason that's so important is that we don't have enough academic leadership in medical schools. There are 0 American Indian deans at a medical school. In the year 2021, that's just not acceptable. There's only 2 of us who are associate deans. So we really need to also focus on building leadership in academic medicine for American Indians and Alaska Natives. So we're trying to do our part at University of North Dakota.
Well, we'll have to have you back to talk about that track, because that can be said for not just the medical, but in all college departments, deans that are led, departments that are led by Native Americans. So Dr. Warne, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, he just won the American Public Health Association, honored Dr. Warne with the 2021 Helen Rodriguez Trias Award for Social Justice. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for being with us today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
And when we come back, many Native nations are seeing the effects of climate change firsthand. We'll hear about cases from Maine to Alaska when we come back. Indigenous peoples across America are taking climate change seriously and personally. From Alaska to Florida and California to Maine, tribes are facing floods, rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and increasingly powerful hurricanes. Those in the Southwest and plains have been hit with unprecedented drought, wildfires, heat, and depleted waterways. They're all facing loss of habitat and a reduction in traditional food sources for people, livestock, and even wildlife. Dianna Hunt is a senior editor for ICT and brings us a story from Louisiana, published last week at IndianCountryToday.com, and the title is Homelands in Peril. It's part of a Covering Climate Now reporting series on climate migration called Fight for Their Lives. CC Now is the global journalism collaboration strengthening coverage of the climate story. Welcome, Dianna.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Hurricane Ida hit the coast of Louisiana pretty badly there and left a lot of destruction. What did your story uncover for the tribes there?
What's happened is that the hurricanes are getting stronger as the sea levels are warming. The waters are warming and the sea levels are rising. And so a hurricane that would have caused damage years ago is now causing widespread destruction. And that is forcing tribal citizens in those communities to decide they may have to just leave their ancestral lands and move somewhere else, that they can't live it out there anymore. That's what's happening. It's part of a global migration based on climate change, but it's particularly hitting indigenous communities in the United States.
It's pretty shocking, to read that they're looking at their land that's literally being washed away into the ocean.
They're losing. The coastal erosion is probably most dramatic in Louisiana and Alaska. Louisiana has a lot of marshlands that are being taken over by the ocean, partly because of the rising sea levels, but the oil industry has also been cutting paths through the grasses, and that's allowing the salt water to flow more quickly and at a higher rate into those communities.
Because those grasses were natural barriers to help stop the rush of water, and so they're dealing with that as well. You interviewed a number of people. One of them was Jay Santini. Tell us a little bit about him.
Jay Santini is a Homa elder, United Homa tribe, and he's probably they believe to be the oldest person living in the lower Lafitte area, which is south of New Orleans. It's in southeastern Louisiana. He's 86 years old. He's been in that area for about 50 years. He built his house by hand. He's had it raised after Hurricane Katrina came through. He had the house raised higher on pylons. He's up very high. I think it's probably about 10 feet. I didn't measure, but his house is very high. He did not get floodwaters in his home in Ida like so many of his neighbors did, but he lost part of his roof and water came pouring in again. He's determined to stay. He's not going to leave. He said he's 86. He's just going to live out his life there. Many of his Homa tribal citizen friends and acquaintances and family have decided they can't do it. They've got to move on.
Wow. The story also touched on tribes in South Carolina and what they're facing.
Right. The Lumbee tribe is very tied to the Lumbee River and the swamplands in that area. They're culturally tied there. They have lived for many years using that. They're doing the same thing. They've been hit by hurricanes, by flooding, by rising waters. They are moving. They're moving to higher ground. It's not an overwhelming migration. There are two tribes in Louisiana, the Pointe-Chene tribe and the Ile de Jean Charles band, that have decided they have to relocate the whole tribes. With the Lumbees, they're just little by little, they're moving out of the way. They're moving out. Yeah, Alaska also has several tribes that have voted officially to move. They're going to relocate entire tribal operations.
And then in the Southwest, what's the story there?
The Southwest is facing very different issues. They've had unprecedented heat, drought, lower water tables, reduced waterways. That's affecting food, animals, livability. And once again, in that area, there's not a massive, people are not fleeing from the area, but little by little, some people here, some people there are probably deciding they can't do this anymore and they're going to move out. It doesn't mean they don't go back, but it means that they move out.
And what a tragedy for the community there, who no longer will have that base if they do eventually all move away.
Yeah, the impact, particularly the Homa tribe, was worried about the loss of elders. They're the ones least likely to have resources to rebuild. And it means the elders are going to be moving away and not going to be there to provide that support and connection to their history that they had before. I did have a chance to speak with Jay Santini at his home above the mud and devastation that was below, and he talked about some of those issues.
My mama taught me how to trap. She taught me how to fish with trap line. Because my dad was sick all the time. He had emphysema, he couldn't work. But my mom was a hard worker. She was Native American. Oh, it hurt. It hurt just to look at all the houses that destroyed completely. People don't have nothing at all to start with, at least. I was blessed. I got a house with 4 walls and a roof. I mean, I got something to come back to. But some people don't have nothing at all. I mean, they was flooded so many times because they don't want to build us no protection levee, for one thing. That's the main thing. If they'd build us protection levee, we wouldn't be going through this.
Have you given any thought to not coming back to live here?
No.
Why?
I love it here. I've been born and raised here. I like to see the water all the time. I travel a lot of places. Tennessee, Canada, Arizona, Missouri. But it's nice to see them, the places, but no place like home.
Okay.
So I was raised here, so that's why I like to be around the water.
Well, again, you can read Dianna's story on our website. It's called Homelands in Peril. Dianna Hunt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Join us again tomorrow.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This is Indian Country Today.